The most expensive things in life are never the ones people willingly buy. That was the thought running through my mind when the elevator doors opened and I stepped into a room I should never have seen. My name is Olivia Hart, and until that night, my biggest concern was keeping my small event planning business alive. I was 27 years old, living in a modest apartment in Chicago, and working harder than I ever thought possible just to stay one step ahead of debt. Then a single phone call changed everything. The invitation had arrived 3 days earlier. No explanation. No details. Just a request for my presence at a private event in New York City, and an offer of compensation large enough to cover 6 months of rent. I should have said no. Every instinct told me something was wrong, but overdue bills have a way of making bad ideas sound reasonable. The ballroom occupied the top floor of an exclusive skyscraper overlooking Manhattan. Crystal lights reflected across polished marble floors. Men and women in designer clothing moved through the room with quiet confidence. I immediately felt out of place. Nobody looked nervous except me. Nobody seemed surprised to be there. A woman in a black suit approached and handed me a number card. Please wait backstage until your name is called. My stomach tightened. Called for what? Her smile never changed. You will be informed shortly. That answer explained nothing. 30 minutes later, I found myself standing behind a velvet curtain, listening to a voice echo through the ballroom. Numbers were being announced. Massive numbers. Millions of dollars changing hands in seconds. Confusion slowly turned into alarm. Then I heard my name. My entire body froze. The curtain opened. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me. A spotlight illuminated the stage. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I stepped forward. Lot 21. The announcer said smoothly. Special acquisition package. The room erupted into conversation. I barely heard any of it. My attention had locked onto a single figure seated near the front. He was impossible to miss. Tall. Composed. Wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit. While everyone else whispered and negotiated, he remained completely silent. His expression revealed nothing. Yet somehow he controlled the room without speaking. Nathaniel Cole. Even I recognized the name. Billionaire. Chief Executive Officer. One of the most influential men in America. The bidding started. 10 million. 20 million. 30 million. My mind struggled to process the numbers. This had to be a mistake. A misunderstanding. Yet nobody seemed confused except me. The amounts continued climbing higher. 50 million. 70 million. 90 million. The ballroom became quieter with each increase. One by one, the remaining bidders withdrew, until only a single voice remained. Nathaniel Cole's. 100 million. Silence followed. Complete silence. The announcer smiled. Sold. The gavel struck. Applause filled the room. I could not breathe. I could not think. My entire world had tilted sideways. Across the ballroom, Nathaniel finally stood. Every conversation stopped immediately. He adjusted his cufflinks and looked directly at me. Not with triumph. Not with excitement. Something far more unsettling. Recognition. As though he had expected this moment for a very long time. Then he began walking toward the stage. Each step seemed impossibly calm. Impossibly certain. When he reached me, he stopped only a few feet away. Miss Hart. His voice was low and controlled. You are coming with me. And somehow, the most frightening part was not that he had spent $100 million. It was that he sounded as though he already knew I would. The car ride from the auction house felt longer than it should have. I sat in the back seat of a black luxury vehicle, staring out through tinted windows as Manhattan blurred into streaks of light and shadow. Nathaniel Cole sat beside me, perfectly still, as if nothing unusual had just happened. $100 million. A human life reduced to a transaction. And yet he looked completely unaffected. Where are you taking me? I finally asked. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. Nathaniel did not turn immediately. Somewhere private. That is not an answer. A pause. Then calmly. It is the only one you need right now. My hands tightened in my lap. Every rational thought in my mind screamed at me to open the door, to demand the driver stop, to run. But we were already moving through Manhattan traffic. surrounded by security vehicles I had not even noticed until now. Escape was no longer a simple idea. It was a theoretical concept. When the car finally stopped, I looked up at a building I had only seen in magazines. Glass towers stretched into the night sky, each floor glowing softly like a private world of its own. "This is not my apartment," I said.
No, Nathaniel replied.
"It is mine." The elevator ride to the top floor was silent. Too silent. My reflection stared back at me in the polished metal doors, pale and uncertain. Nathaniel stood behind me, not touching, not speaking, simply present in a way that made the air feel heavier. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space that did not feel real. The penthouse was vast. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire structure, revealing the endless lights of Manhattan below. Everything inside was minimal, controlled, precise. Nothing felt personal, and yet everything felt deliberate. "You will stay here," Nathaniel said as he removed his coat. I turned immediately. "I am not staying anywhere." He looked at me then. Really looked at me. Not as an object. Not as a purchase. As something else entirely. "You misunderstand," he said. "This is not a request." My breath caught. "Then what is it?" For the first time since the auction, something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Not impatience. Something closer to restraint. Protection. I almost laughed. Protection from what? Nathaniel walked toward the window, his back to me now. The city stretched endlessly beneath him. "From the people who placed you on that stage." The words hit differently than I expected. "You knew about that?" "Yes." "And you still paid $100 million? "Yes." My voice sharpened. "Why?" A long silence followed. Outside, traffic moved far below like a distant current. Finally, he spoke. "Because you were never meant to be there." I froze. "What does that mean?" He turned slightly, just enough for me to see his profile. Calm. Controlled. But not detached. "It means someone made a mistake," he said. "And I corrected it." My heart began to race again. "By buying me?" His gaze finally met mine fully. "By making sure no one else could." The room suddenly felt smaller. The truth, whatever it was, sat just beneath his words, waiting. I took a step back instinctively. "I do not belong to you." A faint pause. Then carefully, "I never said you did." The contradiction unsettled me more than the auction itself. Because if I was not his property, then I did not understand what this was. Nathaniel moved toward a side table and picked up a glass of water, offering it to me without forcing it into my hands. "You are free to leave," he said quietly. I stared at him. "Then why am I here?" His expression softened just slightly. "Because I wanted you to be somewhere safe before you realized the truth." "What truth?" For a moment he hesitated, just long enough for me to notice. "That this was never about purchasing you," he said finally. "It was about making sure you were not lost to someone else first." The next morning, I woke up expecting everything to feel different. Instead, the city outside the penthouse windows looked exactly the same. Manhattan still stretched endlessly beneath the morning sun. Traffic still moved through the streets below. The world had not changed. Only my place in it had. For several seconds I remained lying in bed, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling above me. Then reality returned. The auction. Nathaniel Cole. The impossible conversation from the night before. I sat up slowly. A garment bag had been placed on a chair near the window. Beside it rested a note written in neat handwriting. "Breakfast at 8.
No obligations afterward."
Nathaniel. I read the message twice. The wording felt strangely normal considering the circumstances. Almost as though we were two people sharing a home instead of strangers connected by a $100 million transaction. At exactly 8 o'clock, I entered the dining area. Nathaniel was already there. He sat near the windows reviewing several financial reports while sunlight reflected across the glass table. The image looked straight out of a business magazine. Calm, powerful, untouchable. Yet when he noticed me, he immediately closed the documents. "Good morning." His voice remained steady. "Did you sleep?" I hesitated. "Better than I expected." A faint smile touched his face. "That is something." Breakfast was surprisingly ordinary. Coffee. Fresh fruit. Eggs. Nothing extravagant. Nothing designed to impress. The simplicity somehow made everything more confusing. I spent most of the meal studying him whenever he looked away. Nathaniel moved through every action with quiet precision. Every gesture appeared controlled. Every word carefully chosen. Yet beneath that control I sensed constant awareness. As if he never stopped paying attention to his surroundings. Or to me. What happens now? I finally asked. Nathaniel placed his coffee cup down. Now you live your life. I stared at him. That cannot possibly be your plan. It is. You spent $100 million. Yes. And your expectation is that I simply continue normally? Ideally. I laughed despite myself. You are impossible. Something unexpected happened then. Nathaniel laughed too. The sound was brief but real. For the first time since meeting him, he looked less like a corporate legend and more like a human being. The moment disappeared almost immediately. By noon, I had explored much of the penthouse. Every room reflected the same careful design. Elegant. Functional. Impersonal. Yet certain details stood out. A bookshelf filled with architecture magazines. Several books on event planning. A framed photograph of the Chicago skyline. Small things connected to my life. Coincidences, perhaps. Or something else entirely. The longer I remained there, the stronger the feeling became that Nathaniel already knew far more about me than he should. Late that afternoon I decided to test the theory. I found him in a private office overlooking the Hudson River. What is my favorite color? I asked without warning. Nathaniel looked up from his laptop. Blue. My stomach tightened slightly. Favorite coffee? Caramel latte. Favorite city? Chicago. I folded my arms. You answered those awfully fast. He returned to his work. You asked simple questions. How do you know the answers? For the first time Nathaniel paused. The silence stretched between us. Not awkward. Careful. Measured. Finally he leaned back in his chair. Olivia. My name sounded unusually soft coming from him. There are many things you do not know yet. The answer sent a chill down my spine. Such as. Nathaniel studied me for several seconds. Then his gaze shifted toward the window behind me. Such as the fact that last night was not the first time I saw you. Every thought in my mind stopped at once. Because the way he said it sounded less like a confession, and more like the beginning of a much larger truth. For a long moment after his words I could not speak. The penthouse felt different again. Not physically different, but something in the air had shifted. The idea that Nathaniel had seen me before the auction did not fit into anything I understood about my life. I turned slightly to face him fully. What do you mean you saw me before? Nathaniel closed his laptop slowly. There was no hesitation in his movement, but I noticed something subtle in his expression. Not avoidance. Control. It was not random, he said. I waited. The auction, I replied carefully. Or me. He stood and walked toward the window, his usual pattern when choosing his words. The city below stretched endlessly, alive with motion. Both, he answered. My heartbeat quickened. That is not an explanation. It is the beginning of one. I hated how calm he remained while my thoughts were unraveling. Start from the beginning then. Nathaniel did not turn around immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. 3 years ago, I attended a private architectural investment forum in Boston. I frowned. I never attended anything in Boston. You were not attending, he corrected. You were presenting remotely for a project collaboration. A memory surfaced slowly. A late-night presentation for an international design proposal I had almost forgotten. I had been exhausted. I had barely prepared. That was a technical presentation, I said. I was not even visible most of the time. I still watched it. The simplicity of his answer unsettled me. Why? Nathaniel finally turned. His expression remained composed, but the honesty in his eyes made it impossible to dismiss him. Because your design changed the entire direction of the project discussion, he said. Everyone else focused on profit margins. You focused on human experience. I exhaled slowly. That is not something worth remembering for 3 years. It was to me. The words landed heavily in the space between us. I stepped closer without realizing it. So you started tracking me from a design presentation? No, he said immediately. I started paying attention from that moment. The distinction mattered more than it should have. And the auction? I asked. Nathaniel's gaze held mine steadily. That was not the first time I intervened. My stomach tightened. Intervened in what? A pause. Longer this time. Your scholarship funding, he said quietly. The one that allowed you to finish your studies. I froze. That was you. He nodded once. And the internship opportunity in New York. My breath caught. That was you too? Another nod. The room suddenly felt too still. Too controlled. Why would you do all of that without telling me? I asked. Nathaniel walked back toward the desk, placing one hand on the edge as if grounding himself. Because if I had approached you directly at any point, you would have rejected every opportunity connected to me. That is not your decision to make. I know. His answer came immediately. That was what made it worse. He understood it. He accepted it. And he did it anyway. I turned away, trying to process everything at once. Every opportunity one thought had come from luck. Every moment I believed I had earned alone. So the auction, I said slowly, was your way of finally meeting me? Nathaniel did not respond right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than before. It was the only way I could make sure you were not taken by someone else first. I turned back sharply. Taken. The word felt wrong. Dangerous in a way I could not fully define. Nathaniel's expression remained controlled, but something deeper surfaced beneath it. Olivia, he said carefully, you were never meant to be part of that system. My pulse quickened again. What system? He looked at me for a long time before answering. The one I have been trying to keep you away from for years. The silence that followed was heavier than anything he had said before. And for the first time since the auction night, I realized something unsettling. Nathaniel Cole had not purchased me out of desire or impulse. He had done it like a man closing a door that had been open far too long. For the next several days, I could not stop thinking about what Nathaniel had said. Every answer seemed to create 3 new questions. The scholarship, the internship, the investment forum. Pieces of my life that I had always believed belonged entirely to me now carried traces of someone else's influence. Not control. Influence. The distinction mattered, even if I was not ready to admit why. What unsettled me most was not the fact that Nathaniel had been present in the background of my story. It was the realization that every opportunity he mentioned had ultimately been my choice. He had opened doors. I had walked through them. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it made everything more complicated. One rainy afternoon, I decided I needed air. The penthouse had begun to feel too quiet, too controlled, too full of unanswered questions. I left the building alone for the first time since arriving in New York and spent several hours wandering through Manhattan. The city felt comforting in its chaos. Taxi horns, crowded sidewalks, the smell of coffee drifting from small cafes. Ordinary life. Exactly what I needed. Or so I thought. By early evening, heavy rain had started falling. I stepped into a small bookstore to wait for the weather to pass. The shop was nearly empty. Warm light reflected across wooden shelves filled with old novels and travel books. For the first time all week I relaxed. Then I noticed a familiar face. A man standing near the entrance. He was not reading. He was not shopping. He was watching. The realization sent a chill through me. When our eyes met, he immediately looked away. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe not. I left the store 20 minutes later. The man left too. My pulse began to quicken. Cross the street. He crossed as well. Logic told me not to panic. But instinct told me something was wrong. I reached for my phone. Before I could decide whether I was overreacting, a black vehicle pulled smoothly to the curb beside me. The rear door opened. Nathaniel stepped out into the rain. His expression was calm, but something in his eyes looked different. Sharper. More focused. Get in, he said. I stared at him. How did you know where I was? Olivia. His voice remained steady. Please. That single word convinced me. Minutes later, we were back inside the car moving through city traffic. Rain struck the windows in steady patterns. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, I turned toward him. Someone was following me. Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly. The reaction lasted less than a second, but I noticed it. I know. My stomach dropped. You know. He nodded once. That is why I came. Silence filled the vehicle. Who was he? I asked. Nathaniel looked out the window briefly before answering. Someone connected to the people responsible for the auction. Every muscle in my body became tense. I thought you said I was safe. You are. His answer came instantly. Because they cannot reach you here. I studied him carefully. You sound very certain. For the first time, Nathaniel looked directly at me. The city lights reflected across his eyes. I am. Something about the way he said it dissolved part of the fear I had been carrying. Not because he was powerful. Not because he had resources. Because he genuinely believed it. Then another realization surfaced. You have been protecting me this entire time. Nathaniel did not answer. He did not need to. The silence said enough. As the car continued through the rain, I looked away toward the glowing skyline beyond the glass. For the first time since arriving in New York, the penthouse no longer felt like a place where I was being kept. It felt like a place where someone had been waiting for me to understand why I was there. The car did not take us back to the penthouse immediately. Instead, Nathaniel instructed the driver to head toward a secured location on the west side of Manhattan. I noticed. The route changed twice before I finally stopped asking questions. At that point, asking questions felt less like curiosity and more like acknowledging how little control I actually had over where I went. When we arrived, it was not a home. It was an office building disguised as one. Quiet. Controlled. Guarded in a way that was subtle but unmistakable. Nathaniel led me inside without hesitation. I followed because there was no alternative that made sense in my mind. The interior was dimly lit, filled with glass walls and silent corridors. People moved efficiently, speaking only when necessary. No one looked at me directly. That alone told me everything I needed to know. This was not a place where outsiders were common. We entered a private room on the top floor. The door closed behind us with a soft mechanical lock. I turned immediately. Where are we? Nathaniel removed his coat and placed it on a chair. A secure facility. For what? He paused before answering. For situations like this. I crossed my arms. Situations like me being followed? His eyes met mine briefly. Yes. The simplicity of his answer unsettled me more than anything else. I walked toward the window. The city looked different from this height. More distant. Less reachable. You said they cannot reach me, I said. And yet someone was following me in the middle of the street. Nathaniel did not respond immediately. Instead, he pressed a button on a nearby console. A screen illuminated on the wall, displaying several surveillance feeds from different parts of the city. My breath slowed as I realized what I was looking at. You are monitoring the city? I asked. Not the city, he corrected. Specific patterns. I stepped closer. One of the screens showed the bookstore I had visited earlier. Another showed the street I had crossed afterward. How long have you had access to this? I asked quietly. Nathaniel hesitated. That hesitation mattered. Long enough, he said finally. I turned to face him fully. That is not an answer. He met my gaze. It is the only one that matters right now. I should have been frightened. Part of me was. But another part of me was beginning to understand. Something more complicated. Nathaniel Cole did not operate like a man improvising protection. Everything around him was structured, prepared, anticipated. This is not normal, I said. No, he agreed immediately. It is not. The honesty surprised me. I studied him carefully. Why me? I asked again, but this time the question carried a different weight. Not confusion. Not fear. Something closer to necessity. Nathaniel walked toward the center of the room. Because once you were placed on that stage, you became visible to people who should never have seen you. My stomach tightened. And you think you are the only one who can control that? Yes.
No hesitación. No arrogance.
Just certainty. I shook my head slowly. You cannot control an entire system just because you decided to buy me out of it. His expression softened slightly. I did not buy you out of it. A pause. I removed you from it. The distinction landed heavily between us. Those are not the same thing, I said. Nathaniel nodded once. I am aware. The silence that followed felt different from earlier ones. Less tense. More revealing. I looked at the screens again. The patterns. At the invisible network of information surrounding my life. You have been watching everything, I said quietly. Not everything, he corrected. Only what matters. I turned back toward him. And I matter? For the first time since the auction, Nathaniel's expression changed in a way I could not immediately interpret. Not calculation. Not control. Something closer to truth without structure. Yes, he said. One word. No explanation needed. In that moment I realized the most unsettling part was not the auction, not the surveillance, and not the $100 million. It was the fact that Nathaniel Cole had never once behaved like a man who was trying to own me. He had behaved like a man who had been trying, for a very long time, to make sure I was never lost again. The silence inside the secure facility did not feel empty. It felt controlled. Every sound seemed measured, every movement accounted for. As if even breathing had a pattern someone had already analyzed. I stood near the glass wall of the room staring at the city below, trying to process what Nathaniel had just admitted. So this is what you do, I said quietly. You monitor people's lives. Nathaniel did not react immediately. He stood near the center of the room, hands resting lightly on the edge of a desk filled with digital displays. Not people, he corrected. Only specific risks. I turned toward him sharply. And I am a risk? A pause followed. Then he answered honestly. You were a target. The word made my stomach tighten. Was. I repeated. Or still am. His expression remained steady, but something subtle shifted in his eyes. That depends on where you are. I laughed once without humor. That is not reassuring. Nathaniel stepped away from the desk and walked closer, stopping a few feet away from me. He did not invade my space. He never did unless I allowed it. That realization alone felt strange in a situation that should have felt overwhelming. Olivia, he said carefully, the auction was not random selection. I held his gaze. I already understood that. No, he said quietly. You understood part of it. My pulse slowed slightly, not from calmness but from anticipation. Then explain the rest. Nathaniel turned briefly toward one of the screens on the wall. It displayed a series of names, transactions, and coded identifiers I did not recognize. There is a private network, he said. Wealth-based acquisitions disguised as legal bidding events. I frowned. You mean trafficking? I mean ownership systems, he corrected. Different terminology. Same structure. The room felt colder. And I was part of that? He nodded once. You were placed there intentionally. My hands tightened at my sides. By who? Nathaniel's jaw tensed slightly. That is not information you need right now. That is exactly the information I need. Silence stretched between us. Then he spoke again. People who operate in that system do not usually lose assets once they are marked. The word marked made my skin tighten. Assets, I repeated quietly. Nathaniel's expression shifted for a fraction of a second. Not anger. Not softness. Something heavier. You were never meant to remain visible long enough to question it, he said. I stepped back instinctively. Then why am I still here? He looked at me directly. Because I intervened before the final transfer could happen. My breath caught. You are saying you stopped it? Yes.
No hesitaste.
By buying me. I needed clarity. By removing you. He corrected again. The distinction no longer felt comforting. It felt deliberate. I walked slowly toward the center of the room, trying to organize thoughts that refused to align. So what happens now? I asked. Nathaniel studied me for a moment. The controlled executive presence I had seen in every interaction seemed slightly less rigid now. Now you decide, he said. I frowned. Decide what? He gestured toward the city outside the glass walls. Whether you want protection or distance. The simplicity of the choice felt impossible. Those are not equal options, I said. Nathaniel nodded. No, they are not. Another silence followed, this one heavier than the others. I looked at the screens again, the system, at the invisible structure surrounding my life that I had never known existed. Then I looked back at him. Why are you doing this? I asked quietly. Nathaniel did not answer immediately. When he finally did, his voice was lower than before. Because the moment I first saw you, I made a decision I have not changed since. I felt my breath catch slightly. And what decision was that? His eyes met mine fully. That no matter what system you were placed in, he said, you were never going to disappear inside it. For the first time since the auction, I realized something I had been avoiding. Nathaniel Cole had not simply taken control of my circumstances. He had positioned himself between me and an entire world I had never known existed. For a long time after Nathaniel finished speaking, I did not move. The weight of his words settled into the room like something physical, something I could not simply ignore or walk away from. The city outside the glass walls continued its endless motion, completely unaware that my entire understanding of reality had just shifted again. So that is it, I said finally. My voice sounded quieter than I expected. My life was inside a system I never knew existed, and you decided to step in and remove me from it. Nathaniel did not deny it. He never wasted words on denial. Yes. I let out a slow breath, trying to steady myself. And now what happens to me if you are not there? A pause followed. Not hesitation but consideration. That depends on your decision, he said again. I turned fully toward him. You keep saying that, but you are standing in the middle of every choice I have. His expression softened slightly. I am not forcing you to stay here. You brought me here, I replied immediately. After spending $100 million to take me out of an auction, I did not even understand. Nathaniel looked at me for a long moment. I did not take you out of it for ownership. The word hung between us. Ownership. I shook my head slightly. Then why does it still feel like I am inside something I cannot see? He stepped closer but still left space between us. That distance mattered. It always had. Because you are seeing the structure for the first time, he said. That does not mean you are trapped inside it. I looked away toward the city again. Lights stretched across Manhattan like veins of electricity, constant and indifferent. I had a life before this, I said quietly. It was not perfect, but it was mine. Nathaniel nodded once. And I have not taken that from you. I turned back to him. Then what have you done? He hesitated only briefly before answering. I gave you the ability to continue it safely. The words should have comforted me. Instead, they made everything more complicated. I walked slowly toward one of the chairs in the room and sat down, trying to process everything at once. The auction, the system, the surveillance, the hidden structure behind my life. And Nathaniel standing at the center of it all, not as a captor, but as someone who had apparently been preventing something I could not even name yet. How long? I asked suddenly. He looked at me. How long have you known about this system? Nathaniel did not answer immediately. When he finally did, his voice was quieter than before. Long enough to understand how it operates. That is not what I asked. A faint exhale. Years. I studied him carefully. And you have been involved in it that entire time? In opposition to it, he corrected. That distinction mattered more than I wanted to admit. I leaned back slightly in the chair. My thoughts felt fragmented, trying to connect pieces that did not yet form a complete picture. So I was not randomly chosen, I said slowly. And I was not accidentally discovered either. Nathaniel's gaze remained steady. No, then why me? The question came out softer this time. Less defensive. More vulnerable. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window and looked out over the city. When he spoke, his voice carried something different. Not control. Not calculation. Something closer to honesty without armor. Because people like you do not usually survive inside systems like that, he said. And I did not want to watch that happen. The silence that followed felt different. Not heavy. Not tense. Just real. I looked at him for a long moment, trying to understand where fear ended and something else began. You keep talking about protection, I said quietly. But you never asked me if I wanted it. Nathaniel turned back toward me slowly. For the first time since I met him, there was no immediate answer ready in his expression, only understanding that the question mattered more than anything else we had discussed so far. And in that moment, I realized something I had not been willing to admit before. The most dangerous part of Nathaniel Cole was not his power. It was the fact that he had already decided I was worth using it for long before I ever agreed. The room felt quieter than it had ever felt before. Not because the city outside had slowed down, but because something inside me had finally reached a point where it could no longer absorb any more information without breaking. I sat in the same chair, my hands resting loosely in my lap, while Nathaniel stood near the window in silence. For the first time since meeting him, I noticed that he was not watching the city. He was watching me through the reflection. That realization alone made my chest tighten slightly. "So this is it," I said at last. My voice was steady, but it did not feel like mine. My entire life was inside something I never saw, and you have been standing on the edge of it the entire time. Nathaniel did not correct me. He simply turned slowly. Yes. That single word felt heavier than everything else he had told me. I stood up slowly, walking a few steps toward him, stopping at a safe distance without consciously deciding where that distance should be. "And now?" I asked. "Now I am supposed to decide whether I stay inside your version of safety?" Nathaniel's expression remained calm, but there was something different in it now. Less distance. More clarity. "It is not my version," he said. "It is the only one I have seen that keeps you alive." The word alive lingered uncomfortably in the space between us. "You talk like I was already in danger before you ever met me," I said. "Because you were," he replied without hesitation. I looked away for a moment, trying to understand the shape of what he was telling me. Did not feel like manipulation. Did not feel like control. It felt like something structured, built long before I had ever been aware of it. "If that is true," I said slowly, "then why does it still feel like I am inside a choice I did not make?" Nathaniel took a step closer, then stopped, respecting the boundary that had not been spoken aloud but clearly existed between us. "Because you are only seeing the outcome," he said, "not the sequence that led here." I exhaled slowly. "Then show me the sequence." A pause. A longer one this time. Then he nodded once. "You already saw part of it," he said. "The auction. The system. The surveillance." I crossed my arms slightly. "Those are pieces, not answers." "Correct," he said. That answer frustrated me more than anything else. I turned away, walking toward the glass wall again. The city below looked unchanged. People moved through streets, unaware that entire invisible structures existed above and around them. "You keep saying I was a target," I said quietly. "But you never explain what I was a target for." Nathaniel stepped beside me, not too close, just enough to share the view. "Influence," he said. I frowned slightly. "That is not specific." "It does not need to be," he replied. I turned toward him again. "It does to me." For a moment he did not respond. Then he finally spoke. "There are networks that trade access to people before those people ever realize they are being evaluated," he said. "Education, career trajectory, social positioning. It is not about buying individuals directly. It is about securing future alignment." My stomach tightened slightly. "And I was part of that?" "You were flagged early," he said. "Because of your work. Because of your visibility. Because of your independence." I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. That sounds like something I should be proud of, not something I should be protected from. Nathaniel turned slightly toward me. "It becomes dangerous when multiple parties begin competing for the same outcome." The words made me go quiet. "Competing," I repeated. He nodded. "The auction was not the beginning. It was the escalation." I felt a strange sensation settle in my chest. Not fear. Not anger. Something closer to disorientation. "So when you said you intervened," I said slowly, "you were not exaggerating." "No," he said. "I was simplifying." That honesty should have unsettled me more than it did. Instead, it made something else surface. Curiosity. "And now?" I asked again. "What am I now?" Nathaniel looked at me for a long moment. Not as someone observing a problem. Not as someone assessing risk. but as if he was finally acknowledging the part of this he could not structure or control. You are no longer inside that system, he said. But you are still connected to the consequences of it. I studied him carefully. And you? A pause. I am the reason you are not alone inside those consequences. The silence that followed was different from all the others. It was not filled with information or tension. It was filled with something unresolved but undeniable. For the first time since the auction, I understood something clearly. Nathaniel Cole had not simply taken me from one world into another. He had positioned himself as the only constant between them, and now the question was no longer about where I was. It was about whether I was willing to remain anywhere. He existed.